The following broadcast was produced by the Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco as part of our Lighthouse Learning Library.
But a person who has looked at the job situation now for something like 26 years, who has written, blogged extensively, who you might have heard him on KGO radio or on KLW, where he's been for more than 20 years talking to the Bay Area, really honest, unvarnished truth about employment, how you get it, how you maintain it, how you grow in a difficult economy and an economy that has change written all over it, is Marty Nemko. Marty is not an expert about blindness. He doesn't know jack about blindness. That's why we invited him. We wanted an uncontaminated view of what's happening in the world of employment, the straight stuff, not for people who just sort of giving you the stuff you've heard before, but maybe from a new voice, a different voice, and a voice who, as you'll see, is not afraid to play with the conventional paradigms of what's important and how people get jobs. I'm sure you'll find this very stimulating, interesting, and I know Marty Nemko will be very interested to have your interactions and your questions later on. So without any ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Marty Nemko.
Thank you very much. As I said, I'm kind of humbled to be here because I've never spoken to a group of blind folks before and don't have any professional experience with them. But I do have some experience with handicaps, disabilities, whatever you want to call them. So lest you think I'm just some guy who's, so like most keynote speakers, silver spoon in his mouth, I want to tell you just a little bit of something. I was born to immigrants just straight off the boat, didn't speak a word of English, in the Bronx, in a tenement in the Bronx. I lived underneath the subway that roared 24/7. I have a hearing loss. I have a 25% hearing loss, partly from being in rock bands when I was young, partly aging. And if I ever had one gift, it was as a pianist. I was, at age 5, able to play anything I could hum and play it in full arrangement by ear. And indeed, from when I was 12 till I was 22, I played over 2,000 professional jobs in New York City. And was one of the few kids who could afford to buy a fancy car cash in those days. But a few years ago, I'm 61 now, and a few years ago, and I still have always loved to play the piano. A few years ago, I developed a hand condition, which basically means that 3 out of my 10 fingers I can't use. So I've had to become a 7-fingered piano player. And I'm going to do something now, hopefully for purposes of a bit of inspiration. All of us have had some kind of crap happen to us in our lives. I've certainly not had anything as bad as losing my sight. But we all do make a choice. And this is perhaps the first of the straight talk that Brian has asked me to deliver. Whether you've been raped, whether you've been abused when you were a child, whether you are like the Holocaust survivors who lost all their family and years of their young lives, we do make a choice. We make a choice to fold up and, as Brian said, stay home in the rocking chair. Or a decision to say, damn it, I am not ready to go into the rocking chair, and I will fight it. I've tried to fight the fact that I can only play the piano with 7 fingers, and I'd like to play something for you now. It's something I wrote. It really is more a reflection of my natural personality, which is mildly depressive, with some better moments, but it is hopefully a bit of inspiration to you about what one can do with 7 fingers. Thank you very, very much. All right. So, we can make some lemonade that we had at lunch out of our lemons, but it ain't easy. And again, continuing in Brian's advice to me, no BS, give it straight. It isn't easy to land a job today, even if you are fully sighted. But the effort that I'm going to ask you to do and give you some tools for doing it is, I swear on my life, what I believe is absolutely worth it. I believe that cosmically, the meaning of our lives is defined in large measure by what we contribute to the world. Whether you are a ditch digger, a receptionist, a customer service person, a lawyer, anybody, the extent to which you leave the planet having contributed more than you have taken out is cosmically the right way to live your life. You can't do more than you can do, but do the most, or 90% of what you can do, each in your own individual way, and fight to get the job so that you can do what is the right thing for living on this earth. That is the altruistic reason I want you to do it, but there is a selfish reason. And it was one I learned from my father. My father was a Holocaust survivor, as was my mother. Is my mother, she's still around. And I got to know hundreds of Holocaust survivors, because most of them settled in New York City, because they were dropped off on Ellis Island. And they broke down into two categories. There was the category of Holocaust survivors that processed. They were the ones who went to Holocaust remembrances. They were the ones who went to therapy. They were the ones who went to the schools to talk about it should never happen again. They were the ones who went and commiserated with each other and talked about how difficult it is to get past the horrible loss of their families, the lack of English, the lack of the tortures and everything. And most of those people suffered their whole lives. They lived in the past. They lived with and for their disability. The other group, about equally large, of Holocaust survivors, did the opposite of what conventional wisdom says we should do. They did not process, they did not go through therapy, they did not grieve, they healed with work. They buried themselves into their jobs, whatever it was. My father started sewing shirts in a factory in Harlem. And that indeed made him not completely forget, but move those horrible thoughts from where they would have made him dysfunctional, and move those thoughts to the recesses of his mind, so that, yes, he did occasionally talk about we should never forget, we should never happen again, but it was deep in his recesses. And therefore he and the hundreds or dozens, certainly, of other Holocaust survivors who I know who took that path of healing through work ended up being happier, more self-efficacious, people who were able to provide for their families and contribute to society. Thanks to him, although I grew up in that tenement in the Bronx, after he worked in that factory and saved up money, he didn't, by the way, let me tell you a little more. When he worked in the factory 10 hours a day, what did he do at night? Did he say, I'm exhausted, I'm going to get drunk? No. He went to Roosevelt High School in the Bronx, night school, to learn English, because he knew that if he just spoke Polish and a few words of English, he would be doomed to minimum wage. And what did he do on Saturday morning? Did he say, I worked 10 hours a day sewing shirts in the factory, and then at night I studied, and so Saturday I'm going to go watch football on TV? No. He went to the owner of that factory where he had sewn the shirts, and he said, can I buy the shirts that I sewed for you during the week and sell them on the streets of Harlem out of a cardboard box? He bought them for $1 and sold them for $1.50. That's how he spent his Saturdays. What did he do with the money? Did he say, I have worked so hard, I deserve to spend it? He took that money and saved it until he could afford the first and last month's rent on the most disgusting store in New York City, the only thing he could afford. It was at 105 Moore Street in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. On one side, there was a Puerto Rican deli that specialized in chicharrones, which is deep-fried pork intestines. So it was that smell. And on the other side of this clothing store that my father owned was a live chicken market with the smell of stale blood merging. But that's the only thing he could have afforded. Right? But that, nothing was beneath him. He wanted to be as productive as he could be. And that enabled him to move my mom, my sister, and me out of that tenement in the Bronx to the bottom half of a duplex in Flushing, Queens, which is where I grew up, which was a modest but safe neighborhood, a quiet neighborhood. So for him, work healed him, healed my family, served the community in that horrible neighborhood in Brooklyn by providing good quality, fairly priced shirts and pants and whatever, and provided the ultimate role model for me and for my sister. I think you see why I became a career counselor. I see work as the ultimate healer, the ultimate cosmic contributor, and so I know that it is hard to land a job, especially in this economy, but it's not impossible. If you fervently realize that your life, apart from the money, will be infinitely richer and better for working, and therefore put that effort in, I believe you will feel better for that. So, now to tactics. I am a loner. I am somebody who would never join anything. I'm a hermit. I love to write. I love to play the piano. I love to be with my doggie. I wanted to bring my doggie here so badly, but they said there's no dog except service dogs allowed. So he's at home. He loves to come. He's the sweetest little white dog. But in any case, I'm a loner, but I recognize from having been a career counselor for 26 years, 3,800 clients, that most people are social. The same thing that made Facebook such a wild success because people like to connect and team up. It's the same with job seekers. Unless you're alone, if you know you're a loner, then don't do this. But if you are one of them, like most people, who do better with connection, with group support, if you're somebody who'd rather take a class in person than online because of the group thing that happens, I encourage you to join an existing group of job seekers or start your own. There's a ton of them. There is a website called job-hunt.org that lists hundreds, all over the, thousands, all over the country of these job search support groups, but you're going to have 4 days here together. job-hunt.org. But this is a fantastic thing Brian and Kathy have put together. To bring you all together, team up. Team up, and they don't have to be people who are having the same career aspiration as you do. It can be completely different. You want to be there to give each other ideas. Honest, no BS feedback on your pitch to each other, on your resumes. Emotional support, laughing with each other, sharing job leads. Hey, this particular employer is particularly blind friendly. Making fun of stupid interviewers and their stupid interview questions. But if you are the kind to team up, studies show that on average, you do better in a job search support group that meets. It's very simple how it can meet. It can meet by phone. It can be in person, of course. You meet once a week, and each of you gets a few minutes in the hot seat, and you report. You say, this is what I did this week. These are the questions I have, and this is what I commit to doing next week. And you go around, and you're held accountable in a loving way, a loving taskmaster way, not a disgusting way. By the way, I believe in being direct, as Brian was asking me to do, but I don't believe in being mean. The older I get, the more I believe that kindness needs to undergird everything. I was a pretty tough guy when I was younger. And I really believe in kindness. I really, really believe in kindness. Tough where you must be, but kind where you can be. Okay. So, next. I want to render an opinion based of ignorance, but I want to, as Brian was saying, he said there's a real issue about whether you bring up that you are blind in advance or you let them discover it, etc. I want to render an opinion based on ignorance, which I want you not to accept as true, but to take, as Brian was saying again, in concert with the other opinions you're going to get throughout the 4 days. I am an advocate of disclosure up front, and I'll tell you why. I am well aware that legally, employers are not allowed to be prejudiced against blind job seekers or any disabled job seekers. But in reality, people, like on every other variable, we vary in terms of how open we are to anything. How open we are to fast-talking New York Jews like me. How open we are to blind people. How open we are to careful, reflective, slow people. Your job in trying to find employment is to find a match. It's like dating. You want someone where the chemistry is going to be right, where he or she is going to embrace you for your strengths and your blindness becomes fairly secondary. Not somebody who's got to struggle and feel making every reasonable accommodation and everything else. Because what's going to happen is you're going to fail more often. You're going to feel crappy. He's going to feel crappy. And it's going to give all disabled people a bad name. Every success that you have and that a disabled person has is a victory for all disabled people. And you're more likely to succeed with a boss who's on your side. That's the idealistic view of it. Now the pragmatic. Let's say you don't disclose. And then you show up for the interview with your walking stick or your dog or whatever. They're feeling hoodwinked. Like you pulled something over on them. That you weren't fully disclosing. Is that the kind of basis, the honest basis on which you want to start a relationship? Most employers do not trust job seekers, and with good reason. Because 40% of all resumes contain false, let's call it creative writing. Right? Job interviewees are coached to have perfect, primed answers. Well, how come you have been unemployed for 19 years? Right? So employers don't trust job seekers, and the most important thing they want in the candidate they're actually going to hire is somebody they can trust. So if you wrote this application describing all this stuff about you, you're God's gift, and then without disclosing that you're blind, they will, right or wrongly, feel hoodwinked. It's certainly not going to increase the trust between the job applicant and the employer. Somebody's got a hand up. Okay, go ahead. But they will know eventually anyway, and you don't want, it's like in dating. If I've advised some people on how to write a Match.com ad. I could write a Match.com ad by putting phony pictures of what a sexy stud I am, and that I'm 35 years old, and and make up all this stuff, and I can get 10,000 responses from gorgeous women. But it's not going to be a match. It's not going to work out. So the goal is to reveal your true self. If I were looking for a job, I would reveal my positives, absolutely, and my negatives. For example, I am the world's worst team player. These days, it seems like every job, you got to be a team player. As I said, I'm not only a loner, but I am somebody who hates, I'm impatient by nature. I can't sit in meetings, listen to all the discussions and all the processing. I can't do it. I tend to dominate meetings, make people feel like crap. I can't do it. So if I were looking for a job, I'm going to write on that application. You need a project done, you give it to me, it'll get done and done well. But if you're looking for a team player, use my resume as liner for the bottom of your bird cage. Right? And can you see how that honest disclosure makes it more likely that the right employer is going to hire me? No, I'm not going to get as many responses. I'll get far fewer. But the right employer will say yes. And this is one guy's opinion. I'm sure you'll hear many others, but I wanted you to at least hear mine for what it's worth. Okay, next. Oh, by the way, let's say you decide to not disclose, and you show up in the interview. I'm going to say something else controversial, and you may not want to do this, just one guy's opinion. If I were a blind guy, and I didn't disclose in my application, and I'm showing up for the interview, that my blindness is the 500-pound elephant in the room that they're not allowed to talk about and they won't bring up. But I can and I will. Not only will I bring it up, though, but I will not bring it up with the sanitized language that merely makes people feel nervous. I would bring it up with humor. I would actually say the following. I would say, I'm the only person that can't see the 500-pound elephant in the room, that I'm blind. Right? I remember Sidney Rosenblum in my high school. Sidney Rosenblum was in a wheelchair. And Sidney Rosenblum made fun of himself in the wheelchair constantly. He would challenge people to races. He would talk, I don't even remember. But all I remember is he was comfortable with his being wheelchair bound. And that made him beloved. Because nobody wants to be prejudiced. But and it makes it easier to not be prejudiced when the person who's got the disability is comfortable with it. So his making fun of himself, nobody would want to make fun of. Kids are really evil. They tend to make fun of people. Nobody made fun of Sidney Rosenblum because he made fun of himself. He was beloved. So I think the same thing applies in the job search too. I'm not saying you should make a joke of yourself. That's not what I'm saying. But to occasionally, as appropriate, to lighten things up about it, because most employers, and this is again no BS, most employers see a blind applicant as an ADA lawsuit waiting to happen. And that terrifies the hell out of them. Especially in this job economy where indeed many, many companies are just one lawsuit away from going out of business. So you have to reassure them that you are not an ADA lawsuit ready to happen. You've got to be like a regular person. Yeah, I don't want them to be unfair to you. No. Reasonable accommodations, absolutely. But you've got to disabuse them of the fact that the fear that you're a lawsuit waiting to happen. Yes.
I'm sure you believe this. You would want to state it in a way that doesn't say, I'm blind, but rather, because I have not had vision for X number of years, I have learned how to do whatever.
Absolutely fine. Absolutely. Sure. No, right. I'm going to talk about abilities in a minute, but I certainly you're not describing it as though it's the kiss of doom to your ability to do the job. Of course not. Okay. Next. I will take questions later because I think a lot of these, like example, his comment, and I think will be addressed. I don't know if I'm being romantic here, but I actually think that at least in some ways, blindness can be an asset. And I'm going to give you one real example that would convince a hard ass like me. If I have a blind applicant, I know they are less likely to get a job in the job market. It's tougher for them. So if that person is good, they're going to be more loyal. They're not going to job hop like so many people do. If that person is good and we become connected, that person will probably stay with me for a long time. And I love that. Because even if I'm alone or if I've got somebody working for me, I want a long-term relationship. I don't want somebody who's going to be quitting on me every week. I have a personal assistant. And my personal assistant, even though I pay like about $13 an hour because the job is quite menial, the average personal assistant stays with me for 7 years because I treat her with respect, we have fun, I take her out to lunch, etc. So I think it's very important that you can sell the fact that, hey, I am blind, and that does make me less viable to average employers. So if we work out well together, you can count on me being loyal. That's a real plus, and it's going to resonate with a lot of employers. Can anybody, is there another asset that you can come up with that you think is an asset in the workplace for being blind, other than loyalty? Wow, better, this I didn't know, that you have a better, that blind people have a better safety record in the workplace. That would be really surprising to a lot of folks. What's another one? Any other advantages that blind people have in the workplace? Great, often more organized. You have to be organized just to get through school and life. So these are things, if they're true, you'll know you're never going to hear me ask you to say anything unethical or to stretch the truth. But if there are legitimate assets that you as a blind person have, you go sell it with pride, not hype, but with fair pride. There was one other question. Yes, you're the massage therapist. Great point, the listening thing. See, that's something that isn't too discordant with a public perception. Most people think that, well, if you've lost one of your sensory inputs, you're going to be better you're going to increase the sensitivity of the other. It's going to be true, not of everybody, but if you, in fact, are a better listener because you have lost your sight, then yes, and listening skills are like totally critical. Sell it. And that actually brings me to my next point. Most people are so wrapped up in themselves, frankly, and I'm going to be really straight again. I've seen disproportionately people who have a disability tend to be more wrapped up in themselves because they've had a disability, they've had to suffer something, and so it's about them. And and the best thing that a job seeker can do is listen, not only to what is said, but how it's said. Just getting the vibe, getting the feel, and not just talking about you, but asking them about what's the problem. What problems are you going to hope I can fix? I want to be a great employee. The more you can tell me about what would make me a 5-star employee, the better I can do it. And what could I do to help you, Mr. or Ms. Boss, get a top evaluation when you get reviewed? Do you see how asking those questions and listening is going to differentiate you from the many other applicants for the job? Listen, ask questions. It is not all about you. It is about, just like in love and in a relationship, it's about both of you. Okay. Somebody had briefly mentioned the notion of skills, mentioning the blindness and skills apart from the blindness. You're not just mentioning it as a negative. You're absolutely right. Here's a trick. Nobody likes a bragger. If I say, oh, I'm a great public speaker, and I'm a great writer, and I'm a great pianist, even if it's true, he's a big ego, he's a bragger. You don't like me. You can't like me. Here's a trick that I tell my job seekers to do. Because you do want to sell your skills, but how do you do it without being a bragger? There's 2 ways. One is a kind of a cheap trick, but I can't resist telling you about it. Instead of saying, I'm a good writer, simply say, people tell me I'm a good writer. If you say, people tell me, you're just reporting a fact rather than your own self-appraisal. So the people tell me trick is often very helpful. There's another way to sell your skills that is very powerful, and it's one that's used in journalism all the time, and that is the story. People love stories. They are convinced by stories. And there's a certain kind of a story. Now, this you may or may not have heard before, and you probably hear it sometime during this week, but I need to tell you because it's so critical. There's a certain kind of story that works best for job seeking, and it's called the PAR story. Raise your hand. How many of you have heard of a PAR story? P-A-R. Oh, good. Good, then it is new for many of you. Great. Okay. PAR stands for Problem, Approach, Resolution. It's a problem you faced, the clever or otherwise impressive way you approached it, and the positive resolution. So, for example, and this can be, I noticed a couple of people saying that they were looking for a receptionist job. You would think, well, receptionists don't have to deal with problems very much. Oh, yes, they do. So, for example, and let's say you're trying to convey, again, your skills and your abilities. You can say, I've been a receptionist before, and the thing that you have to be able to do is be able to handle 10,000 things at one time. So let me tell you a brief story. There was, coming in to my, into the office, was the CEO of a company who had come in to see my boss. And at the very same time, somebody who was in the break room cut herself as she was slicing a piece of bread, and she was freaking out. And I had 4 lines ringing. And so what did I do? I told the CEO, if he wouldn't mind, because I've got 4 lines ringing and we've got this woman, would he mind going in, that there is a first aid kit in the top cabinet there? Would you mind helping that woman? Everybody wants to help. He felt great. He was, instead of being ignored, he was feeling like I was in control, helping him. I went and answered the 3 lines, gently, without seeming frazzled and out of control, put him on hold and handled him appropriately, and everybody was happy. And when the CEO came out at the end of the meeting, he said he really appreciated my calm and that I really did the unusual to put him into action. That's a PAR story. I just made that up, of course. But even a reception, problem, there was the problem, bleeding person, 3 lines ringing, CEO coming in. How I approached it, put the CEO into action, and the positive resolution, he thanked me on the way back. Can you see how that would convey that you are cool under pressure and can multitask so much more powerfully than if I said, oh yes, I'm a very good multitasker. PAR stories are powerful. Okay. Now, I do think that in an interview, I notice a number of you using, these are Braille writers. Is that what you're using? Right. I have heard recently about things called screen readers. I didn't know about screen readers until I was preparing to come here and talk to you guys. But that a blind person can use a screen reader to end up converting what's on the text into auditory speech. That's fantastic. And that would disabuse many employers of, well, how is she going to handle what's on that screen? Okay, well, that I didn't know. My own ignorance. But at least, certainly at minimum, seeing how well you can use screen enlargers if you've got some vision, if you're a low vision person. Whatever the, maybe my example wasn't good, but there are technologies, assistive technologies, that can help you to do your job. And the employer is not going to believe it. I've written 4 screenplays. And one of the basic rules of writing a screenplay is show, don't tell. So you can say how well you can handle these tasks with assistive technology, but if instead you bring in a piece of assistive technology that would be important on the job to which you are applying, and you demonstrate it, show, don't tell, it's going to be far more impressive. Make sense? Okay, I have a question here from this woman on, yes.
I was just going to say that that's an excellent way to approach disclosure too. If you bring something portable like a Victor, anything small enough to bring into an interview, and you start popping it out, then they're going to naturally want to know what you have, and it's a good way to lead in, and it's a natural lead in.
Thank you. Okay. Yes. I want to get this recorded, so I'm going to walk over to you so you can talk in the microphone. Axel.
So regarding screen reader use, my personal experience with disclosing it in job applications and stuff, when it comes to computer service jobs, tech support on IPs and stuff, employers are really appalled by that because they freak out. They might they just see their system is going to crash or whatever it is. So
Good points. You see, in these.
I recently wrote a confidential letter to a CEO of our IP actually, which is expanding dramatically, and they're looking for tech support persons and all that kind of stuff. And I was just suggesting, in the long run, given if there's an issue with screen reader using customers, their technicians are not familiar with that, and so they explain this from a total different perspective, right? And there can be some issues how to convey the message and so forth. But nice letter, but no response.
What I think is important here is this shows you the example. Here is why teaming up for your job search to share what works, what doesn't work. Please, and that's a really good way to emphasize that point. Team up, share the common expertise. And I would imagine that there are websites that already have discussion groups where issues related to employment are there. Search on that stuff. It's available. Okay. Now, near the end of a job interview, it's probably a pretty good idea to ask, do you have any questions about whether I can do the job? By asking that question, it allows you to find out what their objection to you is and gives you a chance to counter it. And you also get a sense of how blind-friendly that employer is. Good thing to ask at the end, but you should, if possible, be asking various good questions, a few of them, not a lot, but a few throughout the interview. That shows enthusiasm. It shows curiosity. Study after study shows that employers love enthusiasm above almost everything else. Okay? Questions? Now, after the interview, everybody writes a thank you note these days that says thank you. That's not good enough. In this crappy job market, you got to go beyond that. Your thank you letter can do much more than say thank you. It can, for example, it can accentuate. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make up one. I'm going to dictate kind of a model thank you letter. Just for the heck of it. All right. So, dear James, it was a true pleasure interviewing you for the job of a receptionist, because I really think listening to what you had to say in the interview and reading the job description, I've really got I've had the qualifications. I was particularly delighted to hear that what really matters to you is blah. Because, for example, I did blah, blah, and blah. It reminds him, even if you said it in the interview, it reminds him that you did that already on the job. It highlights your strengths. Now, I've had additional opportunity to think about that question you asked me about blah. In other words, this is the question you flubbed, right? I've had additional opportunity to think about the question you asked about blah, and then you give us a new answer. It gives you a second crack at that bad question, right? And then finally, I'm more excited than ever to be working for you, and I look forward to hearing from you sincerely. Can you see how that's a lot better than, thank you for the opportunity for interviewing you, I'm still interested in the position? Right? Okay. Here are a couple of bonus suggestions, extra credit items, whatever you want to call them. With your application, this is when you're applying to an advertised job, think about including a one-pager on a topic that the employer would be impressed with. So staying with our little receptionist example, if you wrote a one-pager that was called My Top 10 Ways to Be Efficient, or My Top 10 Ways to Multitask, or My Top 10 Ways for Time Management, you use that to accompany the standard resume and cover letter, which they think is going to be full of BS anyway, it's going to differentiate you. It's a nice little extra credit technique that has been used very many times successfully. At the end of an interview, another way to differentiate yourself, and not everybody's going to do this. It takes a certain amount of cojones and ability. Let's say in the course of the discussion, because you've asked some questions throughout and you've listened carefully to that boss describing where the problems are, where the priorities are, for you to ask, could I write a proposal for how you might tackle that particular problem? They'll always say yes. They have nothing to lose. They're getting free help from a free proposal, free solution from you. But that shows a tremendous go-getter quality. Yes. It is, if you, at the end of an interview, you feel that there is something that you know that the employer needs that merely hasn't been quite fleshed out well enough, offer to write a brief proposal. Say, could I write a brief proposal about how you might, streamline the paper flow in this part of the office, whatever it is. He or she will usually say yes, and you go and do it, and you get it out the next day. It speaks volumes about who you are and differentiates you enormously. And of course, you can write the plan for how you streamline the paper flow in a way that accentuates your strengths. So if you're a whiz at the Microsoft Office spreadsheets or Access database, include that in your plan so that you're the one who's quintessentially qualified to do it. Okay, that's an extra credit one. Now, this is really useful. After you've applied for a job, the usual pencil and paper way, if you, by any chance, using LinkedIn or your personal network, whatever, if you know somebody who could make a call to that employer, ideally it would be somebody who knows that employer, but that can't always be the case. But you then have somebody unsolicited, just even leaving a voicemail is fine. Leaving a voicemail for the employer that says, I hear that Jane Jones is applying for this position. I just want to let you know she's terrific. You should really hire her. That is a great way to lift your resume from the pile to elevated status. Make sense? And one other thing I want to say, and this is not extra credit, this is actually really core. In this crappy job market, advertised jobs tend to get dozens, if not hundreds, of applicants for each position. And so most of the jobs in this era of scarcity of jobs are not gotten by answering ads. Some do, but normally, even if it's answering an ad, you need an introduction. Your jobs are probably going to come from people who know you. This is not news probably, but it is more true in this unprecedentedly bad job market. I have been a career counselor for 26 years. The last 3 years have been getting worse and worse and worse, by far the worst in all of my 26 years being a career counselor. And whereas in the old days, yes, a mediocre applicant for a reasonably good fit position will get the job, just answering an ad or a little bit of mild networking. Today, I got to tell you, it requires extraordinary effort and getting people to tout you to people with the power to hire you. If you don't have an existing network, you got to build. You don't have to build hundreds of them. Build some close relations as much as you can with people who might be able to tout you. It is, I can't sugarcoat it as Brian was asking me to do. It's a tough job. The average job seeker now is taking between 4 months and a year to land a job, and that requires significant work to do it. It's a job. So you got to use or create a network. It's very important. Okay, I'm going to end my keynote with a story, but I would like for us to answer some questions. Now, any questions that you feel I have not covered that you wish I did, I would like to hear your questions now. I'm going to come over to you, over here. I'm walking to you.
Yeah, what is it that causes employers, for example, you were talking about they consider us a lawsuit. They can consider us a lawsuit. So why are they so afraid to hire us when we could have so much more, we could have as much potential as anybody else? Because
statistically, the disabled are more likely to file a discrimination lawsuit than a white male under 35. And they know that. And the track record is that people of color and women and disabled people file many more lawsuits than white males who are 35 fully abled. And so they know that. The laws about employment are very, very different for what are called protected classes. There are no, in most states, including California, these are what are called at-will states. Employers can let anybody go unless they're in a protected class. If they're in a protected class, there's a whole, mountains of laws and protections and regulations. And so every employer, and certainly their human resources department, know that you hire a person of color, a disabled person, person over 40, woman, they have additional rights and therefore are more likely to sue. Yes.
Sir, I'm Farhang. I can walk in for an interview without the employer knowing that I'm visually impaired. In my case, do I declare it upfront?
One opinion, if you don't really need a lot of accommodations, then no, I wouldn't. If you, for the job to which you are applying, if you will need substantial accommodations, then I think it is wise to disclose it up front. Because then, again, you're going to be much more likely to get that match between the right employer and you. And also, it engenders the trust that you weren't trying to obfuscate it. You revealed it, I would say. You're welcome.
Okay, my name is Dan, and in the job interview process, I always hear from job coaches about the tricky questions that only university professors seem to be able to decode in terms of your answer. And I've always, of course, I'm still unemployed, but I've always taken the tact of when somebody's asked me a question that I didn't know, I said, I'm sorry, but I do not know that. And if I can conjecture, and in one interview, I had no idea about mechanical engineering, and I started to make up the answer, and it turned out I was right. And they did have these machines that could do that and all that kind of stuff. So, but I just always believe that you should be honest in your answer, but so many job coaches say, oh, you got to polish yourself.
Well, I think you're talking about the kind of question that is often used at employers, like, why is a manhole cover round? Or how would you move Mount Fuji? Right. They know there is no real answer. The purpose of that question is twofold: to see what they call your ideational fluency. That is, how can you be creative on the spot and come up with ideas? How can you think on your feet? How resistant are you to being flustered? So, for example, if somebody asked me how I would move Mount Fuji, I would say, well, obviously you can't move Mount Fuji, but you can make it appear to move by changing the background using some software so that the background is moving. So it doesn't matter that my answer was right or wrong. But if you simply say, I don't know, it's almost like a passive aggressive, like, you're wrong for even asking me the question. So when you get those really questions that are really impossible to answer well, remember it's a test of your creativity, ability to think on your feet, and calm under fire. Next question.
Famous saying, you can move a mountain by bringing down one stone at a time.
And again, it doesn't matter what the answer was. Yes, you can move it, and you can say one stone at a time. That showed that you stayed calm under pressure. You're creative, human. They don't care there is no right answer. That's not a question where they're expecting the answer. They want to see that you have a creative solution, that you stay calm, you can think on your feet. Other questions? I'm coming over to you over here.
I just wanted to share a positive story. Over 15 years ago, at a job interview, I did ask the question, does it bother you that I can't see that well? And they came back to me, they didn't think I could get to their new job site. So that day I got on a bus, went straight down to their new job site and called them back and said, I can get here.
I love it. That's precisely what I said. Remember I said right before the end of the interview you want to ask, do you have any questions about whether I can do this job? That was what he basically asked. They raised the objection about transportation, and he proved it. And again, show, don't tell is the most powerful. That's why it'd be not a bad idea for you to keep some assistive technology, portable stuff, in your briefcase or whatever with you. Pulling it out in response to his question is even more impressive. Any other questions? Okay. And I'm going to end with, yes, I see one more question, please. Well, I'm walking over for some other question, then I'm going to come back to you.
This is more of a comment than a question, but they were talking earlier about how you can't always afford the screen readers. if you have Department of Rehab, I know everybody doesn't have them, but if you have them and they can afford to get you that equipment, or if you already have the equipment, you can have screen readers on 3 different computers, from what I've heard. So it's not impossible.
So this is a perfect example. Again, team up, team up, team up, team up. You can all share ideas collectively. In this case, I'm not some big wild leftist, but in this case, some collectivism will really help. Okay, you had one more question, and then I'm going to tell my final story.
Based on what you know about the labor market, what would you say are demand occupations?
I really love that question. What are some in-demand occupations? It's very easy for me to say that, give it an answer, but it's a mistake. Because 10 years ago, when you asked me that question, not you personally, when people asked me that question, I said nursing, I said physical therapy, I said the environment. And so by the time people got finished training for that, there was no more. There was no more. So it is a mistake to chase the hot field. Yes, I think it's probably fair to say that the boomers getting older, that is a trend that's not going away. So fields related, jobs related to elderly, whether it be senior housing, retrofitting homes to make them more senior or disabled friendly, or insurance for older people, personal companions, those businesses are pretty clearly likely going to grow. But in general, it's a mistake. Even the environment. Today, I don't know, it was not well publicized, but CERN, which is the largest consortium of European science research agencies, reported in the journal Nature, very prestigious journal Nature, that global warming is not primarily man-made. Very little. And there have been a number of these studies, so it is possible that our obsession with global warming or with solar, which by the way also has been shown to be quite a boondoggle. Actually, solar stock index is down 85% from its all-time high, which not coincidentally was when Barack Obama was elected. And that you've heard, I don't know if that company Solyndra, that the government pumped $1 billion to start, but the science isn't there. Solar is just not powerful enough and cost-effective enough to solve much of our problems, so they're out of business. So don't be a lemming. Don't follow the crowd. Follow your personal interests or your skills or who you know in your network, because you may, for example, not care squat about soybean processing. But if you happen to have somebody in your network who manages a soybean processing plant and says, I need somebody to be a really good customer service person or a coordinator or an IT person or whatever, mightn't you take that job? And in this job market, with relationships being so core, let not the fads be your guide as to where to focus, but your interests, your skills, and your network. Make sense? So now I want to end with just a little story that connects back with my father. Oh, by the way, I should let you know, we're going to take a 10-minute break after this, and then we're going to come back, and I'm going to do what I call 3-minute career makeovers, which means I'm going to be taking volunteers from you guys, and you're going to come and you're going to tell me your situation, and I'm going to try to give you a baby step toward improving your, either finding what career you should pursue or how you should land a job, or you're going to start a business, how to do it. So think about during the break, think about if you want to be one of those volunteers, and I will call you up, okay? So that's what I got planned for after the break. But first, continuing on with my father. As I said, my father did not live in the past. He worked. But in that store on 105 Moore Street, that was really a pretty horrible place, and it was so small, the only thing he could afford was this tiny little store, so that most of the merchandise, the shirts and the pants and the sport jackets and whatever, had to be displayed outside on the street on pieces of 4x8 plywood on sawhorses. And they were out in the street, and this was the most dangerous neighborhood in New York, or one of them. And so there was tremendous theft problem. Teenagers would come, and they would swipe stuff off of they were out on the cart and just run away. And he couldn't afford to hire somebody, big and beefy to watch. So guess who was his security guy? And if you think I'm nerdy now, boy, I was a lot nerdier when I was a teenager. And so there I was, and and it was only on Saturdays, of course, because I was in school. This is like I was 13 when I started doing this. And one day, business was slow. And I was 13, and so I was no longer completely wrapped up in myself. And my dad and I remember leaning on a parking meter that was right out in front of the store. And I suddenly had this kind of epiphany question that I said, Daddy, how come you so rarely talk about the Holocaust? And he said, Martin, the Nazis took 5 years from my life. I'm not going to let them have 1 minute more. He said, Martin, never look back. Always look at the next baby step forward. And I believe that to this day, that lesson is the most important lesson that I have learned and that I have ever taught my clients. As I said earlier, each and every one of us has had crap happen to us, including, in your case, losing your sight. In my case, losing 3 of my fingers. But we make a choice. We can look back, or we can do what my father said. Always take the next baby step forward. I wish that you do that. Thank you all.